Um, Thank you so much for that. So I'm going to share my screen, and I hope that as we make our way through the next 35, 40 minutes or so, that you're braced to go for a sprint with me, a sort of marathon across, of course, over 200 years, but certainly the last 3 years of what we've been discussing in Boston and what we've been learning even before that. And then really an opportunity to look ahead. So with that said, I hope you don't mind. I had the honor for the Olmsted Now bicentennial of working with members of the Massachusetts Ponkapog tribe here in Massachusetts, as well as members of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, Herring Pond Wampanoag tribe, and the Nipmuc tribe. And we have found it essential with partnership and learning from them to acknowledge the lands and waters that we worked on for our bicentennial initiative were their ancestral and unceded territories, and really make sure that we're surfacing a lot of the truths about the violence that kept them from being able to steward their territories. They're still here and with us, and very much active in land stewardship, and we're eager to learn from them. So for today's presentation, I'm eager to give you a sense of what was Olmsted Now in terms of initiatives and partnerships, power sharing, and a project we call Parks as Platform, as well as then a little sort of aerial or high-level view of the report that will be published next week, that we have been putting together to take the learnings that we've accrued over this past year and share them out. And then finally, following on that, just some key takeaways that might be useful, not just for us here in Boston, but for the entire network. So first of all, what was Olmsted Now? We were thinking about an acknowledgement of the past for its present impacts and potential to help us shape a different future in Greater Boston. So you can get that through these visuals of this back and forth between an over 100-year-old image of Franklin Park, the largest park in the Emerald Necklace in Boston, and then a contemporary image. So Olmsted Now is not a permanent nonprofit. It was an initiative for the bicentennial. The Emerald Necklace Conservancy, as a nonprofit, was in partnership with Frederick Olmsted National Historic Site, which is in Brookline, right next door, and of course in coordination with Olmsted 200, co-organizing this effort. So I just want to acknowledge, you'll see a photo of our first planning meeting. Dee Dee was there, many colleagues were there, and we were building off of the work. I know Jerry Wright is on the call, of a lot of pre-planning and organizing that Jerry had been doing, not just for the past decade, but actually for many decades in Boston. Our goal for Olmsted Now was to, of course, honor the fact that Frederick Law Olmsted Sr. turned 200 in 2022, but we didn't presume that everybody across Greater Boston knew who Frederick Law Olmsted was. So we really wanted to focus on his ideas and how his park designs were a platform to expand on, his legacy ideals, what we distilled as this notion of shared use, shared health, and shared power in parks and public spaces, and to do so with an acknowledgement of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's notion, the fierce urgency of now, because tomorrow is too late. So we really did want to think about this being an opportunity to build coalition, right? To reconnect neighborhoods and organizations, of course, with the aim of making parks and public space more vibrant, verdant, equitable, and welcoming for all. I believe many of you know the Emerald Necklace Conservancy was founded to steward the parts of the park system designed by Olmsted across Boston's neighborhoods. You can see the map on the upper left of this initial notion of this connected park system that is today called the Emerald Necklace, connecting the Boston Common, Garden, and Mall to then this curvilinear system that connected Boston as it was growing and accruing more neighborhoods into the city. But I will just note that when Olmsted was referring to his Boston work, he wasn't only referring to the Emerald Necklace Park system. Much more was designed in Boston by Olmsted than just the system. And he and his firm mentees like Charles Eliot, of course, also were thinking bigger about interconnecting not just neighborhoods in a city, but different parts of a region, like the metropolitan district plan for all of the green spaces around Boston as well. So we wanted to take that into account in thinking about the bicentennial. Of course, I think many on this call know of Olmsted's influence on inventing this term or this field, borrowing this term from Italy, but creating an American landscape architecture practice, his influence on what became the Park Service, on public health, truth in journalism and accounting of history in founding the nation. We were really prioritizing and looking at looking at his work through the lens of justice. So through his writing of Cotton Kingdom and the way that he paid attention to how relationships to landscape could humanize us or dehumanize us, depending on how Americans chose to pursue relationship to land. And his critiques of American slavery prior to the Civil War did develop and coalesce into a set of philosophies that guided his practice. And so we're really thinking about that philosophy or that vision, those ideals, and how far we still have to go to meet them. So that was our focal point. The other thing, of course, we were looking at is that Olmsted did have a very specific relationship to Boston and Boston's neighborhoods, giving a first lecture in 1870, where he was noting with vision and as a forward-looking thinker that, Boston was a mere nucleus of the city that it would become. And so the planning and the drawing and the envisioning of then what could become is also something, that forward-looking perspective is something that we wanted to take account of. And ultimately, of course, we wanted, as we were initiating this idea, first meetings in 2019 with Fairstead and the Conservancy, follow up on conversations with Jerry, and then, convening colleagues in February 2020, we knew Boston was important to Olmsted. He said decline any business that would stand in the way of doing the best for Boston all the time. But also we were on the cusp of some very important elections, of course, nationally, but also locally here in Boston. We had our first fully elected female mayor of color, who was noting Boston is ready for a change. Boston spoken, we're ready to become a Boston for everyone. And so I will note, and Didi can attest to this, we gathered together to think about what we might want to do in 2022, in February 2020. This is in our large office space at the Conservancy's main office. And we looked around the room and there were 38 individuals. And we said, this room is not reflective of Boston. Boston is a majority minority city, and the individuals in the room, we had two who self-identified as individuals of color, but we knew we had to do more work if we were going to make a significant impact for our city. Of course, we all know that then with COVID, that hugely impacted how not just we were perceiving of the bicentennial, but how everyone was perceiving of access to public space. We were grateful that at least in Boston, there was acknowledgement that parks were open and safe and spaces when places of education, when offices, when spaces of learning or worship, et cetera, were closing, museums, spaces of culture. The parks were open. And so recognizing the parks as spaces for vital public infrastructure was key, and building on that reality seemed essential to acknowledge for our bicentennial planning. Likewise, we were noting that the siloing of sheltering in place during COVID, the isolation, was actually impacting our Black and Brown neighbors differently, that they had fewer economic opportunities. They weren't at a steady state, but things were declining. And so we were also taking into account that reality and thinking about what potential impacts the bicentennial could have in Boston. So to sum, Olmsted Now itself, in our vision, in our planning for it, we made a choice. We had conversations. We knew we could do a capital project. We could raise funds for a particular fountain repair or a particular, it could have been a statue like one just unveiled in Boston last week. But rather than a physical conservation project, we chose to conserve and renew community connection. This was a time-based, temporary, time-bound initiative. And instead of trying to create something permanent, we wanted to meet the moment. So it was our focus with Olmsted Now, bring those legacy values forward, focus on those notions of shared use, shared health, shared power, try to acknowledge these triple pandemics in public health and economic and racial inequity. And then, of course, for us at the Conservancy, learn more about the Conservancy's role in Greater Boston as a potential leader in cultural partnership or parks equity. So what could we learn? So here, I'm just going to take us through again, those three sections: partnerships, power sharing, and parks as platform. Partnerships were for us an opportunity to think about what we could do together that we couldn't do alone, to create ways to engage, build resources for each other, shine light on each other's work. And, you know, think about the scope of that in the context of Olmsted's own vision. So not running away from Olmsted, but actually going back to what Olmsted thought parks could do, right? So parks were a space where citizens could be animated with this common purpose, each individual adding by his mere presence to the pleasure of all others, all helping to the greater happiness of each. We wanted to lean into this idea. And we knew that there were definitely going to be some partnerships that we would pursue with Olmsted heads, right? And so let me just say, you know, of course, if you can't see him on this call, you know, Jerry Wright for decades has been celebrating Olmsted's birthday in Boston. We wanted to see, okay, how could we amplify that event? What support could we give? What more could we do to make sure that the 200th was unforgettable? And of course, partners at Frederick Olmsted National Historic Site were in lockstep, ready to go and be there and put their best foot forward for the bicentennial. So we did not know that there would be many partners who would join this effort by 2022 who may not have been familiar with Frederick Law Olmsted, but in terms of those ideas of democratic access to public space, in terms of ideas of building equity or acknowledgement of all of us being in that space, adding to the happiness of each, we were going to build new relationships that we never could have expected, that acknowledged, for example, in Copp's Hill Burial Ground in the North End of Boston, you know, what had been described in a news article as the forgotten African and African-American slaves who were buried in Copp's Hill. Well, their ancestors said, we want to tell them they're not forgotten. That is something that we want to acknowledge in this public green space. Or to work with seniors to express themselves, be loud and proud, older and bolder through taiko drumming. So these were things we didn't know were going to come as partnerships, but ultimately added a core intensity and energy and activation and equity to our work. Again, we had this vision in 2020. We literally took a map from the city of Boston's open space plan and put a number of stars on it and said, we know we want many neighborhoods, many communities, many organizations of different scales, whether grassroots, institutional, citywide, involved in this initiative. And we know we need to counter isolation, foster reconnection, support this equitable sense of belonging across Boston open space. We didn't know what we would achieve. So by the end of 2022, this is from our report, you know, these are the organizations just within Greater Boston. The ones on the right don't have a physical space. They may be a collaborative or initiative across expertise or spaces that were engaged. And even beyond Boston proper, there were other colleagues outside. So of course, you know, now Olmsted Network, but NAOP, we considered a very strong partner in advocating for our work and helping us get our initiatives out to the national community. But a number of colleagues across the region and the country were part of this initiative. And again, we knew that we had this vision in 2020. We want to change how we partner. So instead of like to like, big institution to big institution, or grassroots organization to other neighborhood organization, or health organizations partnering with health organizations, how could we mix relationships across scale and see if that might work? So in 2020, we did have 60 partners that we knew were on board with us after some planning. But by the end of 2022, we've now accounted for 185 partners who had been involved in this initiative. And you can get a sense these are people who offer classical music concerts, people who work in food justice, people who are working in the Student Conservation Association, or Transit, Walk Boston, but a range of organizations who could see themselves under the umbrella that is as inclusive as Olmsted himself was a multi-hyphenate, somebody who thought about farming and thought about, was a vice presidential candidate and thought about the importance of truth in journalism. So across a range of disciplines, we knew that our partnership network should be as dynamic and diverse. So then how did we engage these partners when we were, again, all stuck behind screens during a pandemic and then learning how to come back out together and begin to be in public space together again? Well, we translated a lot of our monthly planning meetings into monthly online public dialogues. So we offered 10 public dialogues around themes where our partners were invited to lead conversations. Community voices were the ones who were guiding this dialogue. In January, we had Design Studio for Social Intervention lead a conversation about who gets to belong in these green spaces in Boston. People could also engage by sharing their ideas or their stories or experiences about parks in general or green space in general by sharing a story on our website, olmstednow.org, or sharing events on a calendar, a public clearinghouse for this activity. And ultimately, we did try to reach the next generation with social media and Instagram feed, which grew from, 1 follower in the summer of 2021 through to like 800 followers, et cetera, with people doing Instagram takeovers, et cetera, and sharing news, monthly e-news with people being able to post their events more directly into inboxes. So that was what partnership meant to us. And then we did not presume that all partners would be able to participate in the same way without us being really intentional. So if we wanted to center this effort in Olmsted's original notion of democratic access to open space and think about how accessible is green space to everyone, who's making decisions about parks programming today in Boston, and how can we change that? We really needed to commit to this idea of power sharing, right? To commit to rethinking who's deciding what's happening in the public parks here. So we dug in, first of all, looking at who was already doing this work in Boston. So huge figures like Elma Lewis, who's an original MacArthur Genius Award winner, cleaning up and investing in world-class cultural events in Franklin Park, making it a real destination for Black Bostonians to feel safe in public green space. Catherine Morris picking up that mantle. And then listening to what was happening currently. So in 2020, there's our Franklin Park, the largest park of the Emerald Necklace Park system, was going through what had been called a master plan process, was renamed by our friend Stephen Gray, the little tiny face up in the corner, as an action plan, where we were really trying to follow that idea of listening to what residents want to see happen in their parks. So centering those community voices. So Stephen, we began conversation with him in 2019, and by 2020, commissioned Stephen to help us build a framework for diversity and inclusion for the bicentennial. Stephen saw a lot of opportunity here. Issues that Olmsted looked at in terms of urban ecology, public health, democratic exchange were front and center in 2020 when it came to issues of health equity, racial justice, environmental justice. So we could use the bicentennial as a practice field to learn about and improve as an organization or as an initiative or as a partnership, a coalition in these areas of equity and inclusion. Stephen really mapped, using the Conservancy as a case study, who was living around the parks that we stewarded. And then on the right-hand side, who was involved in helping make decisions about park advocacy or programming or improvements. And he was noticing a big gap. So for us in Boston, you can see the shape of the parks in the Emerald Necklace system on the right. Breaking it down, the advisors, the people working with the Conservancy were primarily in one area of the system, many historical reasons for that, but there was a huge gap in the Franklin Park area and the neighborhoods around that. And he noticed, that is the area where the most individuals who identified as Black, Indigenous, or people of color, especially youth and elderly, were living. And he said, if you really wanted to create this bicentennial with an equity focus, you need to center neighborhood members in those areas, and you could create a committee of neighborhoods. He proposed this notion, not being over on the side, just a group of folks who would be performatively consulted and then a box would be checked, but really center these individuals and all of the voices who are also planning the Conservancy, the historic site, people on all of these planning task forces who had time to participate, and center neighborhood voices, individuals who would want to make decisions with real power behind it, as in money behind it, administrative support, facilitation. So we listened to Stephen, and the Conservancy fundraised for there to be a programming fund to support ideas for parks programming that this committee of neighborhoods solicited. They created the call for participation. They set the terms, the criteria, and then decided what would be supported, and then how it wouldn't just be supported financially, but also supported with other layers of Conservancy experience. So we ultimately, with 14 committee members, selected out of many applications, I can share that in the report section, 16 projects that offered over 40 events across multiple sites in the city of Boston, history-making events, right? So events where a project like that had never happened before in the history of open space in Boston or in that specific park or area, and new relationships were forged. So, an Afromusicologist and percussionist who was very eager to have a festival in a park overseen by the Department of Conservation and Recreation, which heretofore had only maybe had some quick fundraising DJ'd events for soccer youth leagues, was able to meet this individual, understand why the location was important to her, and for the first time try to host an event like this, which was beautiful and successful. Seeing a community with individuals who were under, like itty bitty under age 2, or people who were over 80 and walking with assistance, able to take up space in a park that was chosen because it was the favorite park of the senior citizens who were involved in the project, to be loud and take up space in this neighborhood, especially following issues of Asian hate or following issues of questioning somebody's right to be in public space because of how they looked. So that was a power sharing initiative with a few results. And then Parks' platform was something that the Conservancy could do itself to try to learn and practice how we could program it in the Emerald Necklace parks a bit differently. Try not to just organize concerts or yoga events ourselves, but actually partner with other initiatives and other organizations that wanted to do things in the Emerald Necklace Park space, and work together to amplify what each other were doing. And also, while we're doing that work, not just assuming what public audiences want to see or need, but asking them in a dynamic way. And maybe gather some information or data we could learn from. So we turned over what had been a Summer on the Emerald Necklace series into these sort of cross-neighborhood collaborations, where we could work with a partner once a month, April through October, in one of the parks along the necklace, or all of them. And we could bring some things to the table, our experience in permitting and signage and knowing where power is or potable water, et cetera, but then work with other colleagues who wanted to bring certain artistry to the parks, or new experiences to the parks, and to see if we could learn from each other. And while we were having these events, also asking people what they would like to see. And so we did this across the different parks in the park system at different sites once a month. And then on one day in September, we had a park-wide Park Fest where we did 7 locations all at the same time. It was insane, but we wanted to try it. We wanted to see if we could animate the park system in a way where we could get Boston's attention to want to visit all parks in the same day. And through that initiative, we were building a volunteer base. And we knew that we wanted to then take the data from what we learned, asking questions of people in the park along the way, and get ourselves to this report. So here I am in like part 2. We have this report that we're about to publish, and I'm going to give you a high-level little preview and just let you know, while this report is commissioned by the Conservancy, it was not a solo effort. This is something where we worked with Culture House, another nonprofit in Boston, to help us do data analysis of Parks' platform. We had guidelines set by a great colleague, Julia Gittleman. We used Stephen Gray, Grayscale Collaborative's mapping models as a baseline, as well as really beautiful facilitated reflections of authentic feedback through Joelle Fontaine of Design Studio for Social Intervention. So we evaluated those partnerships, the power sharing Parks' platform, and then we got a little meta because we wanted to understand, in terms of recognition of this work, we all know this metaphor: if a tree falls in a forest and no one hears it, doesn't make a sound. How was this effort acknowledged and valued by other people? So we also wanted to understand, where did this make a mark? Who actually noticed what we were doing? And again, working with Culture House, they weren't only taking the data from our park events, but they were also helping us do the data visualization and publishing this. And so I just want to give you a sense that they're just doing such a beautiful job to collate this into a legible resource. So in terms of partnerships, what were we learning? What were we summing up? We knew that we wanted to create partnerships with a spirit of generosity and possibility. So let's give colleagues options. Let's make this an opportunity, not an obligation. Some people didn't know if their organization was still going to exist in mid-2020 because of what was going on with COVID. We had to approach colleagues with grace and understanding that maybe people would initiate things during planning that they couldn't follow through on. Maybe people did or did not have any resources to prepare, but we could shine light on some good work that they were already doing. So we did want to meet colleagues where they were. How did we do this? We did this through those planning sessions, those monthly meetings online that I was telling you about. And these were opportunities to share good ideas, to network with other colleagues. They were sort of like jam sessions where people could riff off of each other. We tried to, as task forces, come together and say, okay, we think, we want to explore these themes. Who should we reach out to? So planning was a significant part of the partnership work, whether or not it resulted in a program. We had those public dialogues I mentioned. There were stories online. There were events that people posted. So we were able to track, how did people end up participating? And, the scope and scale of those partnerships, and, how did it actually feel? So here are the partners. Of course, you don't need to be able to read every single individual name. They're all hyperlinked to their sites or their activities. We couldn't even fit them on one page. It keeps scrolling over. But what was a huge takeaway for us is when we did just a raw analysis of, say, the organizational mission or the initiative mission of each one of these participants, and broke it down based on the Olmsted Now theme, shared use, shared health, shared power. We had assumed most partners would be in the shared use space, with maybe some in the shared health space and a minority in shared power. And we're bowled over to see that that was really a majority level of participation of our partners. And some partnerships were absolutely expected, right? So of course, with Frederick Law Olmsted National Historic Site, we had Olmsted Summer Sundays. We had never done this before. We said, oh, why don't we have rangers come to our visitor center at the Emerald Necklace Conservancy, and they can do activities and give additional ideas, and maybe people who don't even know where the house is in Brookline will learn because we're closer to Fenway Park, et cetera. And we had hundreds of engagements that were phenomenal. Of course, we participated in the symposium, Olmsted's Landscapes and Legacies, that was organized with NCPTT, with the historic site, hosted in Boston. It was fantastic. There were national colleagues. Yes, of course, those partnerships were there, or even with groups like Walk Boston, walking along the Muddy River within the park system. Check. We did not expect that there would be, whole compositions of music inspired by Frederick Law Olmsted, commissioned for the bicentennial and debuted in Cambridge next to Boston. So we were thrilled that there were also these unexpected partnerships that were beautiful results of our planning. And likewise, we didn't know that there would be an AR, an alternative reality exhibition that wanted to be part of the bicentennial. This is at Mass Horticultural Society in Wellesley, which also has an Olmsted designed section, and was eager to encourage people to come learn about the park system, but also through contemporary art designed just for a screen engagement through your cell phone. So there were a huge range of partnerships, and we broke this down by the data. Yes, about 20% outside of Greater Boston, but 80% within, 25 towns engaged, and where those partners were active. 22 of them with our public dialogues, 34 partners shared individual stories, 3 took over our Instagram feed, 65 shared over 240 individual events on the website, and 31 were involved in our Parks as Platform series. But I highlight this bottom number, 42 partners, or 23%, about a quarter, were involved in these parks equity and spatial justice power sharing projects, which again was notable for us. So then in the report, talking about power sharing, just a map of where those projects ended up taking place, were proposed. We knew that this was something that we'd be able to learn from, not just quantitatively, but also qualitatively. And so I'll just share some quick insights with a few examples. A really great group called Bridgeside Cipher, the nonprofit is Cambridge Hip Hop. They offer open mic experiences or ciphers where anybody, any experience level, can engage in hip hop in an open space. They typically do it under the iconic Zakim Bridge near Boston's Garden Arena in Cambridge or outside of Boston. But we invited them for ParkFest, for example, to come and help us animate a space called Charles Gate, so the North Field, originally part of the fence, that is now under a Bowker overpass. People have had a hard time even knowing that this is a park. It just seems like an invisible pass-through, but with their live open mic, they were able to let this invisible space become visible. So people would stop, little kids, seniors, people in wheelchairs were coming into the park and held in a space that typically they would pass through, right? And so we were learning from Cambridge Hip Hop, who was saying, hey, don't fight that bridge, actually use it. That can be your stage. That can be something that can amplify sound. That can be something that can draw presence. And so we wanted to use that going forward. In terms of another Parks Equity and Spatial Justice project called Baldwin in the Park, it was inspired by a James Baldwin quote called "The place in which I fit will not exist until I make it." And it was in the Rose Kennedy Greenway, which used to be the highway overpass running through Boston before our Big Dig project, and then it turned it into a number of city blocks, a green ribbon running through the city. So what we didn't know, I never knew before this as a person born and raised in Boston, that a site was chosen by Anita Morrison-Matra, here speaking on the left, who's both an urban planner and a cultural producer who does a lot of work around stable housing in relation to culture and cultural expression. She chose a site that was originally the site where Zipporah Potter Atkins, a free African-American woman in 1670 owned a home. I never knew that. And so she chose to activate, celebrate, and animate the site where history had been forgotten, and to do so in an embodied way where people couldn't possibly forget moving forward. And she did so with a group called Jean Apollon Expressions, where they could really get our joints and bones moving so that we would have a body memory of the site in a way that had sort of been silenced, not once, but twice, because history forgot it, a highway went over it, and then even this new park that came out, a researcher, Professor Vivian Johnson, had to discover this history for it to be acknowledged. And so it was a really beautiful location and a new reading of a site for many people to move and remember physically, something very important. The last project I'll talk about is a pretty significant project for us in Charlestown, which is a northern neighborhood of Boston and a very historical part of the city. The artists for an organization called No Loose Braids, Andre Strong Bearheart Gaines. He's the person holding the shovel on the right-hand side, who's a member of the Nipmuc Nation, and he's a cultural steward, reached out to the tribe at Massachusetts at Ponkapog, who would have overseen that territory ancestrally for 10 to 12,000 years, and asked, would they like to learn from him how to make a traditional mashoon or canoe, how to burn out a solid tree trunk to create a water vessel? And they said yes. And so he was very interested in doing this within Boston city limits because of the history of Boston of excluding Indigenous people up until the date where Mayor Menino finally made it legal for Indigenous individuals to be in the city limits without two musketeers escorting them. So until very recently, 2004. And so Andre and Tom Green, who's in the center here, brought in many colleagues from a number of local tribes, Chappaquiddick, Wampanoag, as well as individuals who are Taino, et cetera, to come and participate in this act of cultural revitalization and learning within the city limits for the very first time in over 300 years. And not just to learn from each other about this important history and affirmation of their culture and their right to be in this public space, but also to teach others. So on left is a visit from a class of 9th graders at Charlestown High School who had learned about King Philip's War and were able to ask questions of Andre and Tom, and they were asking questions of each other, like, what would you have said to King Philip if you could say something to him today? And also members of the public, people from the North Shore, from Florida, came out to see this historic act on Boston's waterfront. And what was very exciting is that over 24-hour days and nights for over a period of 7 days. This was not an event that would typically have been permitted. You have Boston Blue laws, you have fire regulations, et cetera. But what was very exciting is that even members of the city's approval team for permitting and approval processes were all seeing the value of, we didn't change the laws, but we got exceptions to the laws to be able to realize this project. And the group that stewards this site, the Boston Planning and Development Agency, even had subsequent meetings saying, okay, we're planning to develop this site with more green space. How can we do this in a way where then that means this project can't happen again? What can we do to design to ensure this project can happen again in the future at this site? So it was a really beautiful outcome of a project that really broke barriers and transformed what could be possible in Boston public parks. Again, we tracked all of this by the numbers, right? You know, how many applications we had that were called for by the committee, how many people actually applied for how much money, how many projects were completed, et cetera. And, you know, how were they led and what did people do that was significant? And I just want to call out all 16 projects where the applicants asked for funding. 100% of those individuals chose to then give funding to other creatives in Boston. They chose to share those resources with others to make greater project impacts. 100% of them chose to share their resources to make those projects even more equitable and better for more Bostonians. And I will also note that while we were able to support $205,000 worth of programming, we were asked for, there was appetite for, there was interest in presenting and talent in the area to present 6 times that. So that was also notable that people are ready, they were hungry to develop experiences in these spaces. And our friends at Culture House, again, would take those numbers that I just put down in that long list and help us visualize this in the report to make it legible and digestible. Lastly, when measuring Parks' platform in the report, I will note that we were tracking, you know, where the projects were happening over the 7 months, and then that 1 month where we had all, you know, 7 parks activated at the same time. And we wanted, again, to ask people what they thought they wanted to see in the parks. Culture House helped us ask questions of people like, have you ever been to this park before? Where are you visiting from? Without clipboards and white jackets and just checking things off or breaking the vibe of the events, actually turning those questions into an experience, while also doing some passive data collection, just observing with activity mapping what's happening in the space, who am I seeing, taking field notes of what people are saying or heard and communicated to them. So we had events, again, partnering with another partner like NPS in Olmsted Park, where Culture House with their ball drop clear tubes are asking, have you been to this park before? Yes or no? How do you feel? Do you feel safe? Yes or no? So taking qualitative and quantitative data. In the Arnold Arboretum, partnering with them for their annual Lilac Sunday, with a great group called Boston Arts Music Soul Fest, BAMS Fest, celebrating Black artistry in Franklin Park, as well as with Fenway Porch Fest in different parts of the Back Bay Fens. We took data in 3 different locations. And again, some of that was qualitative, like this chalkboard where people could give us an answer, what their favorite thing was to do in the park. Also at the Jamaica Pond Boathouse, JP Porch Fest expanded their fest. For Park Fest, you know, again, asking questions in a very easily collectible way across 7 locations in a single day, and really activating people as interest in the park with scavenger hunts, of course, these trampolines and dance floors. We had, you know, notable visitors like Governor Dukakis. And then we finally ended the series in October with an activation at Charles Gate Park. And this was a very rainy and cold day. So we took the advice of our colleagues at Cambridge Hip Hop, and we actually used the bridge as our friend or as a roof during the rain. And we learned a lot from these experiences. I'm just going to show you, you know, in some cases, we had folks reach out to us. We weren't reaching out to them, like Mothers Out Front, saying, hey, we want to do a climate change kids puppet opera. How do we do that in a place without power? And we said, hey, we'll bring the power. We'll help you make this happen for Park Fest. You know, followed what people were doing in BAMS Fest and had artists come and perform. Had tried new things like a drag queen story hour at the Jamaica Pond Boathouse to see, you know, who was receptive, what people had appetite for, and were really enthusiastic and excited to see that people were feeling like the space was inclusive. So Park Fest and the individual park sites, again, we're comparing who's showing up. How does that compare to the census data around the parks? Were people coming from their own neighborhood or coming from a distance? Did they actually, when we were quantifying it, did they feel safe? Did they feel that the space was accessible? Maybe partially. Was it functional? Maybe partially, could be better. These were great baselines for us to learn from moving forward. And then with recognition, how did people think this actually mattered or was worth investing in or trying again? So we were bowled over by the fact that we had a lot of great civic recognition, again, some awards by other nonprofits, and also beautiful reflections shared with us. So I'm showing you at the event of Olmsted's 200th birthday at Jamaica Pond with Jerry Wright, as Mr. Olmsted, we had a number of proclamations shared, and we were measuring, like, okay, civic declarations were made, awards were given. We had invitations to speak in different forums like this one. 40 media pieces were written with 15% of reach beyond Boston. And also who invested in this? That's also a belief of appreciation and care for this work. And many of them were new to the Conservancy, and many of them maybe weren't government or corporate sources, but individuals. So how is this work resonating in our own community? That stood out to us. And again, Culture House would visualize this in a way that was easy to digest. So final takeaways for all of us and for the Conservancy, we knew what we would stick with and what we'd let go of, but we also hope that our learning does support others. We learned along the way. This was over a number of years, but we knew, again, as I said, in February of 2020, we didn't want to go it alone. So our planning team didn't reflect the demographics of where we were living and programming. So we paused and asked who was missing and how we could address that. It was a challenge to find support and funding and confidence for something new. It was hard for us to describe something we've never done before, and couldn't guarantee what the outcomes would be if we weren't ultimately deciding. So it was hard work. Even when we were giving funds to our Parks Equity and Spatial Justice project leads, we didn't assume that those funds would build trust. We really had to prove our allyship by supporting on those hard permitting conversations, addressing the structural challenges to getting these projects to happen and committing to follow up on that. And we also were guided by great advice. Don't assume everybody needs help. Affirm colleagues' agency and know that they can do the work, but give them the option and let them decide what to request. And that is a more respectful way to let people thrive and grow or get the support they need when they need it. We also learned we can't be everywhere at once. Our Park Fest event spread us way too thin. We really needed to focus our energy and resources in a specific partner, specific place, so that we could make sure attendance and appreciation was concentrated. And of course, honor Mother Nature. Some events were too cold. Some events we were blessed with beautiful weather, but also, things happening 24/7 over time. Sometimes you need to just move at the speed that she dictates. We did have some really amazing lasting impacts for our organization. We think about partnerships completely differently, not just having a broader network, but our whole team, our education team, our fieldwork team, et cetera. We even think about corporate partnerships, all with new vocabulary. How do we engage them? How do we decide? How do we assess them, act on them? Which ones are budding or robust? Which ones need tending or don't need renewal? So that's phenomenal. But we also then develop partnerships with internships that last, with a wonderful relationship with our friends at the National Historic Site that's now deeper with stronger programs. And we really were able to diversify our board as well as our park advisors, with new leadership in our organization coming out of these relationships. So we're very committed to continuing that equity and partnership focus on our programming moving forward. And we're experimenting this year in our strategic planning process throughout this year in this idea of being a quote unquote backbone organization. If we're a spine in the city, can we be more than a connector? Can we really offer actual support to others to offer better park experiences in the necklace with this theory of leading from behind? I think these are takeaways for all of you. Certainly if the figure honored is a visionary like Olmsted, then a historic anniversary can be a platform to address present day issues and future solutions. And if partnerships are generous, then placekeeping and placemaking can definitely inspire new understandings of a site. If equity really is your goal instead of being performative, I do think that, you will need to be prepared to share and cede power and let others decide what can, be most impactful, and that does inspire generous sharing by the people who are supported. And overall, it's worth it to take the risks and practice instead of perfect. And if these are goals from the start, you will definitely have growth in your organization. So I'll stop there. I know we're at time. And I hope that this is a valuable resource for the group and would be happy to answer any other questions.
Well, Jen, let me just say thank you. Absolutely fantastic presentation. And I think really underscores what you said and what Olmsted 200 believed from the beginning, that with a visionary figure a la Frederick Law Olmsted, it was very possible and in fact imperative for us to be focused on the future rather than looking to the past or learning from the past as to how we could perfect the future and aspire to some of the goals that Olmsted outlined, which we have yet to achieve. So it's really been, I think, special. And let's just open it up now. I know we're near the end of our time, but let's open it up to questions amongst those who have remained. And we'll be sure if we get further questions, we'll be happy to direct them to you, Jen. And obviously we've recorded this so that people can revisit. And those who haven't seen it can see it for the first time. So do we have any questions amongst us? Yeah, Phil. You're on mute.
There we go. How does that work?
Good.
Greetings from Western Massachusetts, from Stockbridge, Massachusetts. And one of the things that I took away is that our property, our Olmsted property, is quite inconsequential compared to some of the mighty properties that are represented here. However, one of the things I found, my major takeaway from this, was to use that property as leverage for our total programming, so that it need not be, in fact, about the design around the Stockbridge train station, which was done by Olmsted Brothers in 1917, which is riveting and fascinating to me and a few others. But to really use that learning from this deeply researched project to leverage some of the programming we've doing. So I've taken a ton of notes that I'm going to be circulating.
Wonderful.
I think we've got Brad Taylor that wants to say.
Hi. Yeah, great presentation. It's just fabulous. I was particularly struck by the amount of money you were able to raise from individuals, Jen. I think that was just outstanding. And I was wondering about that. Were those, when you map those donations out, I know you've got some very diverse neighborhoods around your parks. I mean, where did those donors come from?
Well, I see my colleague Nika Truvanova is on the call with us, and Nika is our Director of Development and External Relations. We were very much in lockstep on this effort, but Nika would have more of an eye on the geographic locations of the source, sort of by neighborhood as opposed to inside or outside of Boston. Nika, I don't know if you even have that off of the top of your head, but would you have
I think in broad strokes, Brad, thank you for your question. We have not actually, this would be a really great thing to do, is map by zip code the donations that came in. And I think the 66% figure is by head count, not by, dollar amount necessarily. We definitely saw a smattering around the necklace. I would say the Jamaica Plain, Jamaica Pond area is a really huge focal point and a really kind of a sub-branded community, if you will, along the Emerald Necklace. We saw a lot of support from there. A lot of support from farther north in the necklace, Brookline, across the river, and other towns across Charles River that don't even have the Emerald Necklace running through them, but appreciate what that landmass does for the city of Boston. And we actually, some of the fundraising we did was more kind of fun and quirky, and we tried to do more grassroots things like raffle off tickets to, when the US Open came to town, conveniently also during the bicentennial. And then we actually got donors from Florida and Indiana and Western Mass. So a really large smattering, and we continue to receive, donations where we have no idea what the connection is. If someone's kid goes here and runs through the parks, I have no idea, but it was definitely a not a Boston only supported effort. I will say that. And I'd be happy to connect with you offline if you wanted to kind of dig more granular.
Thanks so much. No, but that was, I'm just so impressed. So congratulations on all of that work.
Larry.
Hi, I have a question, Jen. Your extraordinary, the detail that you also just shared with us regarding the evaluation, the quantification, the visual quantification, all of the data that is being collected, that has been collected and is being synthesized, which you just summarized wonderfully in this upcoming report. Firstly, I bet everyone on this call would love to see a copy of that report. But my question is, did you plan that from the very inception, that level of evaluation and quantification and reportage? And did you fundraise around that? And where did the funding come from to support that? Because I know, sounds like there's quite a few interesting entities and individuals involved, and that can be a fairly expensive proposition, just that one piece of the work. So I'm curious about that.
That is a really great question. Thank you. I will say that, I have been working with the Conservancy since 2017 in a more consulting basis. And when I came on full-time for the bicentennial in November of 2021, one of the very first things, as Nika knows, is board members were asking, how are we going to know if this worked? How are we going to know if we made any impact? And I said, I am not an evaluation expert, but that's where calling in a colleague like Julia Gittleman of Gittleman Mendelsohn Associates was essential to set a baseline that we had in place by, say, February, before we were really about to launch all of our programs, to know for sure what questions should we be asking so that when we get to the end of this, we'll at least have some guidance. So that was essential. I could not have known that along the way, when we were working with colleagues like Design Studio for Social Intervention, they're a great spatial justice leader in Boston, and they helped us facilitate the Committee of Neighborhoods work, how invaluable it would be to have excellent facilitation to ask in authentic talkbacks, what really worked, what really mattered, what do you really need? And a third party to do that with such grace and skill that we could hear realistically, oh, when a colleague says, I feel like I need a bodyguard to go into the permitting process in Boston, they may not say that in a report with a multiple choice questionnaire, but that was the type of input we needed to know, how are we going to invest in 2023 forward and what we're going to do ahead, which is not programming for a bicentennial anymore, but how can we dig into some of these challenges and think creatively about what new partnerships we need to set for the year to address that very real challenge. And so I think we knew we needed expertise and guidance. We knew we needed to ask for help. We didn't know the exact degree of detail that we would get, but we knew for sure, at least the board of the Conservancy wanted to know how this would be evaluated. And then certainly many funders who did support the project were also asking along the way a very important question, like was asked here, not just how are you going to publish your learnings, but how are you going to share it and make sure this reaches other people? So this forum right here, that's exactly what I think Olmsted Network is so essential for, is for us to be able to share that learning. So I guess the short answer is we planned a little bit, but had no idea of the scope.
And you fundraised from the start, or at least this was part of the fundraising from the start for that aspect.
There were, some funders who specifically asked, how are you going to measure this? And so then we knew with a question like that might be of interest to them. Nika, you may be able to share more specifically if there were people who had dedicated support.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that we built up something into the budget. We weren't sure exactly what, but it had to do with evaluation and reporting out. And as the process went on, of course, as Jen mentioned, very open-ended and community-centered. So we kind of retooled the budget a little bit, but we made space in our fundraising plan to cover this work. And we did receive one grant very specific to evaluation kind of later on in the process, which was lovely. And this organization really wanted to hone in on how, to move the needle on access to arts and culture in the Boston area. And then we also got some very late breaking gifts, even as we were wrapping up and reporting out. Ironically, I guess, from a fundraising standpoint, right, you want to raise 100% of the thing before it even begins, right? But as it was proving itself, and as the process was lived through by Bostonians and read about, et cetera, so there was a bit of lag time. But we certainly sustained donors' interest, and it kind of even crescendoed toward the end of the program as those things started to actually visibly happen in the parks, and people were spreading the word about them.
Well, I already expressed my comments in the chat box, but I just simply wanted to say that the focus on this systematic, thoughtful evaluation and sharing that information with not only your constituents in Boston, but with the wider world makes the program all that more powerful. And I and I expect Dee Dee and others here on this call look forward to seeing some version of that report when it's fully available.
Yes, Dee Dee, you'll be one of the very first to receive. It's going to be digital online through a form called Issue, so you can kind of turn the pages on screen. So we will absolutely be sharing that through the network.
Well, that's fantastic. And I know we could go on for some time, but this has just been a very special presentation. If you have additional questions, you know how to find us. And I want to thank Jen for her shout out for the network. In fact, this is why we exist, to bring people together and to share best practices, to share lessons learned, and obviously so much to digest in this fantastic endeavor in Boston. So I just want to say thank you to everybody for joining us today. Kara will be back in touch, I know, with many of you, and we do promise yet another fascinating program in February as we, with Patricia O'Donnell, look at ways best to adapt our Olmsted landscapes to current needs, something that I know that so many of you are challenged by, struggling with, and enjoying. So with that, let us wish you a very happy weekend with thanks for joining us, and big thanks to Jen and the Frederick Law Olmsted National Historic Site and Olmsted Now for a really fantastic bicentennial endeavor. So thanks, everybody. We'll see you next month. Okay. Bye.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Ayo.
Bye.